The Christian nationalist panic. This is a topic that is everywhere. We're seeing this terminology, Christian nationalism, and most people have no idea what it even means, what it's even talking about. And we're going to get into all that in just a moment, but I have a huge announcement here on the show. Higher Ground is going to be taking a turn that I am super excited about. It is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's something that doesn't exist right now in the faith and culture and even politics space. And that is a show change, a format change. What is going to be happening starting next week? And again, I can't emphasize how excited I am about this. We are going to be changing up the show here. You'll still get interviews and you'll still get that kind of content, but the bulk of this show is going to be different reporters, TV hosts, people who cover faith, culture, religion, Christianity, people who are out there at all different outlets. And I'm not even going to name the outlets right now because we're inviting people from all over the map, not just Washington Times, not just CBN News where I work, but I'm inviting people from all over the map to come in, and we are going to be breaking down the most important stories of the week from a faith perspective. And it's going to be really cool because we'll have people from different outlets sharing what they're covering. And then each of those journalists, TV hosts, they'll be talking about those stories. And so it's going to be everything from Hollywood content to news content to uplifting content. And I could not be more pumped for that. That starts next week here on Higher Ground. Totally new format. And you're going to hear some voices you know really well. And again, you'll still get those interviews and all of that great content. But on today's show, I want to address a topic that I wrote about in an opinion piece on the Washington Times in my column last week. But it's Christian nationalism. This is really something that a lot of people on the secular left are talking about, and they will act as though there is this sinister boogeyman that is threatening every fabric of our nation. The language around this really frames it as this evil force that is overtaking people's hearts and minds and twisting them into really, I guess, what you would call a zombie-like force, a cohort of people who are bent on the utter destruction of the American ethic, because these people, according to the critics, they don't understand what America truly is. Now, this is the warning. This is what we're hearing. And these self-ascribed Paul Reveres, they're riding in on their horses, they're waving their smartphones, and they're yelling, the Christian nationalists are coming, the Christian nationalists are coming. And it's something we're seeing all the time. And as we look at that, though, we have to pull back and we have to say, okay, what is going on here? What is truly happening? Is Christian nationalism a real thing? Can we even define what Christian nationalism is? Because a lot of fear is being sort of sown around this terminology that is so ever present. And I mean, you have people who are even embracing that term. You know, we're going to get into all of that here in just a moment, but there's a big question at the center of all of this. Is this a strategic effort by people on the secular left to obliterate their ideological opponents, right? To label them as something, to disregard First Amendment freedom, and to basically throw all Christians into one clump and to say, hey, we don't want you involved in the political process. Now, I want to be careful how we talk about this because, again, the definitions are all over the map, and we've seen the headlines. The headlines are warning about the dangers of what Christian nationalism will do. Some people are saying it's the, quote, single biggest threat to religious liberty. And so with all of that going on, you know, it's an important issue for us to dive into. Now, I recently talked with Pastor Samuel Rodriguez, who I love. I'm a huge fan of him. And in his view, Christian nationalism is an exacerbated term. He said, you know, is there such a thing as Christian nationalism? Probably in a church in South Carolina somewhere, hidden in the backwoods. Is it a national issue? No. And I have to tell you, when he said that, it resonated with me because I've been around churches my entire life, and the very scary things that are being said about Christian nationalism, I'm not seeing in any of the churches. I'm 40 years old. I've been a Christian for 40 years, and I have not been around this sort of thing. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying it's not out there, but the very scary boogeyman that has been created is not something that I am encountering in the churches that I attend. So I don't think the problem is anywhere near as sweeping or dangerous as is being claimed. And whenever you have a label that comes with a billion different definitions, spoiler alert, your eyebrows should be raising because immediately you have to say, if nobody can agree on what this means, then how can we have any sort of educated conversation about it? And a lot of times when it comes to these titles, people love to sort of create the boogeyman because it can have a million different definitions that can suit whatever it is you're trying to make it suit. So we have to rifle through all of those definitions to try to understand exactly what is going on here. And so there is a definition, and I shared this in my column, from Amanda Tyler. She's the executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Here's what she said, quote, Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identities. It heavily relies upon a mythological founding of the United States as a Christian nation, singled out for God's special favor. The Christian in Christian nationalism is more about identity than religion and carries with it assumptions about nativism, white supremacy, authoritarianism, patriarchy, and militarism. All right, that is a very interesting framing with a lot of buzzwords and constructs, and of course, some elements that we should not be supportive of in there, of course, because they're not good. But again, how sweeping are these paradigms? And also, and here's the big question, and I think this is the part of the Christian nationalism debate that I find the most disturbing. Isn't it possible that people could believe the U.S. was founded on Christian values without being mushed into the Christian nationalism sort of gambit that we're seeing out there? I mean, you can believe the U.S. was founded on Christian values. You can believe Judeo-Christian values are what held the nation together for all of the woes and issues and mistakes that were made in American history, that still there was a collective framework around those values. That doesn't make you a Christian nationalist. And so that seems to be the biggest problem here, that this Christian nationalist label, without a universal understanding of what it truly means, is being thrown and foisted upon everybody in this Christian realm. And a lot of these people who are sounding the alarm, and this is the other thing that makes my eyebrows raise, most of the people, not all of them, there are some Christians and some progressive Christians, but they're secularists, they're political progressives, they're people who have long lamented, and here's the thing, write this down, get a pen out and write it down because it's important. These are people who have long lamented conservatism. They have long wanted Christian influence over politics to go away. And so that should make your eyebrows raise when people are making these arguments. Now, I'm going to get into some other caveats here, but these forces have, again, clumped together ideological opponents into one political box. They've warned endlessly that everyone must fear this nebulous cohort that we can't really define because the definitions are all over the map. And that's what makes headlines like this one so alarming. I'm going to read it to you. More than half of Republicans support Christian nationalism, according to a new survey. Now, that was an NPR article, and that same article defined Christian nationalism, and listen very closely, as, quote, a worldview that claims the U.S. is a Christian nation and that the country's laws should therefore be rooted in Christian values. So that's the definition now in this particular article of Christian nationalism. I'm going to read it again. A worldview that claims the U.S. is a Christian nation and that the country's laws should therefore be rooted in Christian values. Now, let me read a line from this article here, okay? Christian nationalists in America believe that the country was founded as a Christian nation. Oh, and by the way, this is a political article. This is Politico. This is not the same NPR article. So I was talking about an NPR article. Now I'm talking about a Politico article here, and this is a separate one. And here's what it reads. Christian nationalists in America believe that the country was founded as a Christian nation and that Christian values should be prioritized throughout government and public life. The same person who wrote that article, she went on MSNBC last month and she said that the Republican base has shifted. She warned about extremist ideas surrounding former President Donald Trump. And her name is Heidi Przybyla. And here's what she said. The thing that unites them is Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is a very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. The problem with that is that they are determining, men are determining what God is telling them. She went on to lament that there's a, quote, extremist element of conservative Christians who say natural law, quote, applies specifically to issues including abortion, gay marriage, and it's going much further than that, end quote. I mean, doesn't she realize that Christians, though, have always applied biblical truth to personal and policy preferences? And are the faithful in this country simply supposed to remain quiet and subdued about views they believe are clearly outlined in the Bible on all of the issues she mentioned, and also ignore church teaching, while secular people, on the other hand, are freely allowed to roam and jam through their own relativistic viewpoints down everybody's throats? Like, that's okay. The latter is okay, but the former is not. I mean, critics seem most perturbed by the existence of Christians in America who, like every other group, simply want to influence the policies governing their lives. Spoiler alert, that's why we vote. We vote for candidates who reflect what it is we believe to be true, the things we want to see happen. Atheists do that, Jewish people do that, Muslims do that. Every single human being does that. Agnostics do it, and Christians do it. That's what every human being does. They seek to find politicians and policies, again, that align with the framing of the world, their framing of the world. So it's really the epitome of ideological privilege to lament those who seek to see their values represented in government, all while obsessively advocating for your own perspectives to be enshrined in public life. It's freedom for me and none for thee. And that is what we are seeing so many people on the atheistic and progressive side doing when it comes to this issue of Christian nationalism. Much of the conversation around it really seems more aimed at drumming up hysteria. Really, like that's what it is. It's get people all worked up so they're frustrated about this, and there's so much consternation and there's so much chaos, and that way we can sort of stop the biblical ideals from having any impact over public policy and life. I mean, some of those definitions I read, that's what most Christians believe. Welcome. Are you saying those Christians don't have a voice, can't have a voice? Are they just Christian nationalists who should be dismissed? If we're being honest, we know that the media, Hollywood, universities, and many elites have never understood Christianity. They've been open about their disdain for its values, and they've sometimes even taken steps to undermine its presence in public life. Now that the influence of faith on culture has sort of waned, many of these people have moved from this proclamation of stop infusing your faith into our politics into a full-on effort to manifest a Christian nationalist boogeyman. And I want to just say here, because a lot of people might say, oh my gosh, you're just dismissing this. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. And here's the bigger problem. And this is really something that can happen to anyone. And in fact, without God, it happens much more often on the secular side. The elevation of politics over all else. Christians need to always lead with faith over politics. But it seems that those who are worried about Christian nationalists lurking under every rock, what they really want to see is Christian impact on politics be minimized or entirely removed. And that attempted silencing is the real dynamic that should be alarming us. Not the false claims, but the fact that there are people who want to silence other people simply because they don't like what it is that they believe. But I want to finish on that note. Christians, put your faith over your politics, because that is what matters most, reaching people with the truth and with the gospel. All right, with that said, we are at the end of today's show. I really, really, really am so excited for next week, for the change in format here on the show. So much exciting stuff to come. Appreciate you listening to Higher Ground, and you are going to love what is to come. We will see you next week on another episode of Higher Ground with Billy Hallowell.